At 5:30 PM, call to order at 5:30 PM. Would you please do the roll call?
Mayor Rockdale,
Here?
Mayor Pro Tem Perry,
Here.
Councilmember Caffey,
Here.
Councilmember Walker,
Here.
Councilmember Oliveris. Here. Councilmember Starnes,
Here.
Councilmember Milton.
Here. Please stand and join me for the pledge, followed by an invocation. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Tim, Dave, did you have someone pray? Okay, thank you.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this beautiful day. Thank you for the blessings and that we have enjoyed. Lord, please watch over this meeting, guide our discussion, guide our decisions. Let them all be pleasing and in line with your will. Lord, we ask all of this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Thank you. Do we have anyone signed up for citizens' communications?
No, sir.
No? Okay, we'll move on to the regular agenda. Regular agenda item number 1 is consider and take any necessary action on a resolution amending the 2024-2025 fiscal year budget for the city of Rockdale. Tim, I guess you and Roxanne have this one?
Sure. So now that we have our kind of a budget in line, there are a couple of things that we're looking at doing that we've talked about before, but were not included. And one of them, if you recall, a few months ago, the Girls Softball Association came to the city and requested $40,000 in hot funds for making improvements at the softball diamonds that were ineligible for that funding. And I think council gave impression that that is something that wanted the city to support. Mr. Brunson and I did go out there and meet with them. They do have a sponsor that's going to make improvements to one of the fields entirely, and they have some funds available. And so what we talked about with them was providing funding for replacing all the fencing and some retainage wall out there. Estimate cost of about $25,000, and they were excited and happy about that. So what we are asking is an amendment that would allow for that $25,000 to be spent on those improvements at the girls' softball field. The other thing is at Veterans Park, there's one of the playground structures that now we have a second slide structure component to that playground structure that we had to remove. It became unsafe and dangerous. And as of right now, that slide has been removed from the regular pay structure, and I think is it boarded up so you can't. So kids can still get on the play structure, but it looks pretty crappy, and it doesn't have full use. And when Gerald looked at replacing those, you can buy just the slide structures to reattach to those. They were like $10,000 a piece.
For a slide?
For a slide. And rather than do that, I was suggesting that we may would have just replaced the entire thing, because the whole structure is kind of old, and spend about $30,000 or $35,000 on that structure. Now, I was able to move, I think, $12,500 from one item that we ended up not needing, because it was for the deposits for the Civic Center that actually are in a payable account. So the money comes in and goes out for the refund of the deposits. So we didn't need that as an expense because we didn't include it as a revenue, but we have that separated out. So that $12,500 I moved into that particular line item. So we need a little bit more to be able to fund that $30,000. So what we're asking for in total, a budget amendment, $42,700 from reserves into that account through this budget amendment.
And I guess I have a question, if I may. You're comfortable, confident that we have that amount of money, I don't want to say in reserve.
Yes, we do have the money we do have our reserve that we are over. And the way I look at our reserves generally is every October 1 where our reserves stand, because throughout the year, those reserves grow and they go down, because we get money at irregularly throughout the city, throughout the year. So sometimes we're higher, sometimes we're lower, but we look at it every October 1, and that's what we base our budget on to make sure that we have our adequate reserves. And we had that money over and above our reserves on our.
Some examples we have of money leftovers, like I thought you said a while back, was like we budgeted for a certain amount of police officers that we didn't get, so that money would still be there, correct?
Yeah, so but that money after at the end of the year, whatever we don't spend goes back into the
Right,
general
yes.
fund reserves, and then we set the new budget for the new year.
Right.
And you look at what the beginning fund balance and the ending fund balance for the fiscal year, and we had that money available in the fund balance to do that. More than that, do you recall what the October 1 fund balance was?
100,157.
So we had, over and above our required, we had
100,000.
a little over 100,000 in that required reserve. And that, that changes. Normally during the beginning of the year, I don't like to suggest using revenues that, like if sales tax money is trending higher, I will do a budget amendment that budgets additional revenue from revenues that are coming in above budget. It's too early to say or do that, but
And
I
the
do.
girl-
And there are a couple of other projects, I just didn't have them ready. I know like the security cameras are another project that we're gonna have to probably do a budget amendment on to move that project off of, and actually get it behind us.
We have a line item in our budget for parks.
Yes,
That doesn't come out of that?
we have a line item that has $25,000 in it, and that gets used for park maintenance throughout the year for different things, and it could be used for that. But normally, there are other miscellaneous things that have to happen throughout the year. As an example, we could have taken that $10,000 slide out of that particular budget. But with two of them, that's gonna eat up two of those. That's gonna eat up all but 5,000, and I'm sure we'll have, on an annual basis, we normally spend close to that. That's why we budgeted it at 25,000. We normally, it'll fluctuate depending upon the needs, but at this point right now, where we stand, I would be, it will be good if we do the $25,000 for the girls softball, and the difference of that was 42,000. What did I?
So, just,
17,700 for the additional money for the new playground structure.
so, just so I understand for future, looking at the budget, understanding what's in the budget or what's included in a particular line item, if I see $25,000 in parks, that's not for parks improvements, that's just maintenance.
What's the line item called? It's called Parks,
It's
Park-
called
Parks
general
General Maintenance is what
under
we're
the
moving it
Parks
into.
Department.
And I think the $10,000 for Gerald and Roxanne, the $10,000 planned for improvements to the trail at Veterans Park is coming from that line item?
Yes.
So 10,000 of that 25,000 is already planned to come out of that line item for improvements to the trail there. That the Parks Board has been very, they've been very, very encouraging that we get that done and get that behind us. So,
Okay. How do we, so, on girls softball, do we just give them a check?
No.
25,000? Do they have to bring us quotes and it's a reimbursement? How does that work?
I don't know exactly, but we'll probably go ahead and contract to have that done ourselves and pay the contractor that's doing that ourselves.
What, didn't you say, it was several council meetings back, when we were discussing Rockdale Girls Softball League, that the city, our crews could do some of that work to offset some of that cost. Was that relative to this, or is that something?
That's something else. I was talking about potentially bringing some fill in.
Okay, okay.
Where they need some additional fill. And I think they already have that taken care of, don't they, Gerald?
We did some work out there, I'm not sure if it's completed.
Yeah.
And I think I saw only one quote to replace that fencing. Is that correct? Because I would like to see more than one quote.
Yes, there will be. That quote basically is just there for budgeting purposes, because
Okay.
we'll have to get the quotes, and they'll typically be good for 30 days.
And when you say quotes, do we have a standard minimum amount required?
To get quotes, it's normally
The
3.
number of quotes? Okay, three.
Now, sometimes if we can't get 3, we have to at least be able to document the effort that we've taken to get 3 quotes or more. We can get 4 quotes or 5 quotes, but the policy is, in the procurement policy that we just
You'd
adopted,
like to get 3. And I would think we would pursue trying to find a business that's located here in Rockdale to provide that labor and
Yes.
equipment for us or
So,
materials.
I mean, there's a provision in the procurement policy that when we go out and get quotes from different vendors, we'll try to get quotes from local vendors, and if a local vendor is not necessarily the lowest vendor, but I think if it's within,
3%.
is it 3% or 5%?
I think, when I read it the other day, it said 3%.
If they're higher, a little bit higher than the low quote, we could still go with them, and we would.
Okay.
Because we want to support our local businesses. But if we have a quote that's, 20% higher, but it's local, we're not gonna say, I'm sorry, but we're gonna be more conservative with our,
And we also use
Expenditures.
buying cooperatives too, because they're guaranteed through the government to be competitive. And, that is also approved with our requisition policy.
yeah, generally that satisfies the bid requirement, not necessarily the quote I mean, if we're going to get 3 quotes, we'll get 3 quotes. So,
Okay.
okay?
Council, any other questions? Tim, any other comments or information regarding this item?
Not regarding this, I will be coming with another budget amendment, because I just found out we got a $1 million grant today. So that will have to be budgeted.
Congratulations to all.
It's exciting.
Yeah. Wonderful news. Council, no other questions on this or comments. I'll entertain action on item 1 of the regular agenda.
So I have one more question.
Yes.
So when you say reserves above surplus of reserves, so we in our general or whatever funds, we're sitting on the state recommended
We actually have a
amount of
local-
dollars that they recommend that we have in reserve. So this is above and beyond that threshold. Is
Well,
that
the
correct?
state recommends you have a reserve. I think that this council has adopted a policy of 105 days
Correct.
of reserve in the general fund. And so it's, that 100,000 is over and above that required, that
Okay.
reserve.
That was,
Now, that is as of October 1.
sure.
That's what we'll always use, to make sure that whenever we set our budget, that we are reserving that.
And based on your experiences, 105 days, how does that compare?
Generally, my experience is in the general fund, 90 days is what is more recommended, and 120 days in water and sewer, only because of the fact that water and sewer, those revenues and expenditures fluctuate a great deal more than our revenues and expenditures for the general fund. So, where I've been before, the policies have been 90 days for the general fund and 120 for water and sewer. Here, we just have 105 for both.
I think the state says a minimum of 90 days is what they recommend.
I mean, the bigger the city, the less reserve. So I don't know what it would be for a city our size. But a city like, Dallas is gonna have maybe a 60-day reserve, because that's like $10 billion or whatever.
Sure. Council, any other questions or comments regarding this agenda item? I'll entertain any action on this item.
I'll make a motion that council approve the resolution amending the 2024-2025 annual budget.
And would you like to specify those amounts? I think it was 25,000. What were the amounts, Tim?
Well, if you adopt the resolution has that as it is, but it is $25,000 for the girls softball complex and $17,700 for the playground equipment to go into the Parks General Maintenance Fund from reserves.
Councilmember Starnes, are you good with that being a part of your motion, sir?
I am, sir.
Not to hold it up, when would that be, when would those, that playscape be put in? This ballpark, like before the spring or the summer?
It would have to be ordered, and I don't know what the timeframe is for delivery.
Joseph and I talked about today, he's gonna get pricing, up-to-date pricing this week, and one of us will play.
So I would imagine probably it'll take a couple months, 2 or 3 months.
Okay,
And that'll get those 3 playscapes back up to,
It'll get that playscape where there's 2 slides, are there 2 slides on the same playscape?
Yes, sir.
It would replace that playscape.
What will we be doing with the existing playscape?
Throwing it away or finding if there's somebody that would want it. I haven't seen any market for that, for an older playscape like that has components that are missing. But if there is, I would be open to hearing ideas for that.
We have a motion currently on the floor by Councilmember Starnes. Council, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any discussion?
That's a complete replacement of that, we said slide earlier, but it's a complete
Yeah, there's two,
replacement
it's a new,
of
whole new playscape.
of that one
Playscape,
playscape.
yeah, and I'm not sure what all components are on that, but there's slides and ropes and whatever.
Mr. Starnes, I would suggest that those were donated by Alpha Tau Delta. And they should have first shot if they want to give it away to somebody.
Okay.
If not, I
Alpha
think
Tau
their answer is no, but
Alpha
They should-
Tau Delta,
yes, sir.
It's a service sorority here in Rockdale.
okay.
They donated those 3 playscapes.
What I can do is, at a future meeting, I'll come back and have those declared as surplus, and then we can dispose of it either by whatever legal means necessary,
Okay.
including donating it back to them if they want to find a new home for it.
I think their answer is y'all do whatever y'all want with it,
Might be a
but,
church or something that might want it.
okay.
Okay, any other discussion? Being none, we'll vote. All in favor said motion signify by raise your right hand. Motion passes. Item 2, consider taking any necessary action on the second reading of an ordinance ordering and establishing procedures for the 2025 general election to 1, elect council member for the East Ward, and 1 council member for the West Ward, and 1 mayor at large for the city of Rockdale.
This is just the second reading of this. I decided to go ahead and stick it on this meeting rather than wait till February. So,
Nothing changed from the first go-around, right? I'll make a motion that we approve the order for general election for May 5th of 2025 for 1 West Ward, 1 East Ward, and the mayor at large.
I'll second that.
A motion and a second on the floor. Is there any discussion?
May 3rd, I'm sorry, not May 5th.
I knew what you meant.
Any other discussion? Being none, we'll vote. All in favor said motion signify by raise your right hand. Motion passes. Item 3, receive a presentation on street assessment project. Ben?
So I've given you a lot of printouts. I apologize for that. I've also sent you an email, and I will send you an email after this meeting with the spreadsheet, because on that spreadsheet, we've gotten some quotes from engineers on what some repairs would cost typically. So you can start plugging those numbers, because what Tim and I are going to ask is that you would list your top 5 priority failing streets and top 3 priority poor streets. But we'll dig deep into this, and I'll field any questions as we go, so feel free to interrupt me. But I've given you a summary to make it as easy to read as possible. It's on this here, and so I've defined the terms, because as you go through this spreadsheet, I've tried to be as specific as possible on what we've seen on each 100 block. And so you'll see different types of cracking defined, the base, the type of asphalt, chip seal, things like that are on there. If you flip to the second sheet, we have a scoring criteria that I've color coded to try to make it as easier to read. And it goes on a 1 through 5 system. So 1 is your excellent streets, and then it scrolls down to 5, which would be a failure. And then I've given you the block scoring, because one of the things Tim asked for is as you start prioritizing, there's going to be streets that have very little traffic, and there's going to be streets that have a lot of traffic, as you know. There's a local street, which is, I'll give the example of Skiles would be a local street which only feeds people on Skiles to get to their homes. And then there'll be a collector street like Belton, where local streets feed onto the collector, and they either take you to the highway or they'll take you to another local street. Collectors are going to have more traffic than local streets, which may be more of a high priority for you guys to put on your budget list to fix. And so I've defined the traffic of how we've gotten there. You'll see VL is very low. It's just abbreviated. That means there's less than 200 trips per day. And what a trip is when someone leaves their home to go to work, for example, that's one trip. If they go back home, then that's another trip. So it's not a there and back, it's just to leave is one, come back is another. And what the traffic ITE will say is that typically a single-family house has 10 trips per day. And a trip is not all just the individual. If you'll think about an Amazon delivery, that's a trip to your house. The mailman comes to give you your mail, that's a trip to your house. So it's not just contributed to that individual. Low is between 200 and 1,500 trips per day, moderate 1,500 to 5,000. And then I believe the highest traffic count that we have, because highways are not included in this assessment because we don't repair those, is medium high, which is anywhere between 5,000 to 10,000. So as you go through that spreadsheet, when you go block by block, you will see the traffic count next to that, as long as the notes, what the type of development that is surrounding it. So there, I've either listed that there's single-family development, which is of course your single-family housing, or a commercial development, which would be any of your commercial businesses, churches, schools. And then if I've left it blank, I've tried to put in the notes of what's surrounding it because it means it's a mixed use. So there may be single family to the south of that block, and there may be some type of commercial to the north. And then the final thing on this spreadsheet is I put what cross sections there are. So there's 3 different types. A rural, it means that there's no curbs at all. A urban means that there's only curbs, and then full urban means there's curbs and sidewalks installed. And so I've given you 2 different spreadsheets that you'll see. The first is titled the Rockdale Street Analysis. What that spreadsheet is, they're both the same, they're just ordered differently for your readability. That is alphabetical order of all streets. So if you wanted to find a street, that you'd go alphabetical. That the sorted one where you see the color coded, that's by the rating that it received. So you'll see different 100 blocks. It's still alphabetical, but you'll see only a certain 100 blocks of each street. And then you may find that other 100 blocks in the poor. So I'll give the example of Alcoa. Not all 100 blocks of Alcoa is a failing street, so you'll find some in the failing column, and then as you go through the spreadsheet, you'll find some in poor, average, and so on.
Is there a street sorting on here that combines both the ones that are in failure along with the highest traffic?
That's our next sort. That's one of the next thing I wanted to do.
Okay.
Was to have him take all of these that failure streets and sort them by traffic count.
Okay, fair enough.
And the same thing with the poor streets and sort them by traffic count. Because that really tells you, you generally, you want to look at and fix the ones with the highest traffic count, they're in the worst condition in order of priority. The whole purpose of this is to really give you a basis, a foundation for making a decision on what streets that we need to attack in what order. Somebody asked me if I had on here if these streets are in the east side or the west side, and I said, no, I didn't put that in there. I mean, we could, but I mean, the idea is that you're gonna fix all the streets that need to be fixed over a period of time and schedule them in the order of priority based on, not based on who lives on the street or who's asking for the street, but based on the condition and the volume of traffic, the number of people that live on that street, so.
Did we hire a firm to do this, or did you do this?
Well, Barbara started this, so if you see Barbara, thank her for that, because she set the foundation of this, and then myself and Justin has been working on this for 6 months.
A lot of work, thank y'all.
A lot of work, hard work, thank
It's
you.
impressive, it really is.
Thank you.
Well, it's eye-opening.
Depressing.
It's eye-opening. A
Depressing.
lot of red and brown.
True.
I mean, to tell you,
True.
kind of give you an understanding of what's in front of us, did you come up with a linear foot or a total
Yes,
square
so
foot for?
Tim did ask for a number, and so I can give you the number of, so if you look at all the 100 blocks that are failure, you're looking at around 725,000 square feet, which would be, I have some formulas, again, I'll forward you that. So I just assumed, right, if it's all asphalt, and so failure and poor streets are gonna be more than just the surface coating. Typically, it means that the pavement's failed to the point where there may be base construction or more than just an overlay that needs to be done. And so in that number, it's gonna cost about $3 million.
And what was the linear foot again, or the square foot again?
725,000 roughly.
And if you figure an average of about 18 feet in width, maybe,
Yeah.
About 40,000 linear feet divided by 5,180. How many feet in a mile?
5,280.
280. It's about 7.5 miles of streets approximately
Combined all together?
that are failing.
Okay, there.
Then they fail. That doesn't include the poor streets, which are,
And the poor is about 2,132,000 square feet, which, in plugging in those numbers to the formula, assuming it's asphalt and assuming that it's going to be more than just a overlay, would be about $8 million. Again, these numbers vary because we have streets that have an asphalt overlay of concrete. And so if you have to go in and repair the concrete, that's a significantly higher cost than fixing an asphalt base.
so my challenge will be when we identify a listing of streets is to find the money to make that happen. I don't know yet how that's gonna be possible. In one city, we issued a big bond to begin with and then, committed to a certain level each year, every year after that. And then, put it, so typically you're gonna do all your streets in about 20 years, and then you're gonna start over again. Because a street that's done in asphalt, unless you're working in concrete, which makes it more expensive, but a concrete street's gonna have a 30-year lifespan generally. Instead of a 20-year, but the cost is gonna go through the roof to look at concrete streets. So we do have some concrete streets here in town. I don't know whether I'll be recommending that we come back and redo those in asphalt, leave the concrete curb and gutter and asphalt those streets. But that's probably what I'll recommend because of the fact that if an asphalt street, costs, 60% of a concrete street, at the end, maybe it only lasts for 15 or 20 years, but then you can come back and just do an overlay of that street instead of repaving this whole street, and that's even less. So your long-term costs are gonna remain lower.
So, I'm not looking at it because I can't see it because I didn't bring my magnifying glass, but I want to make sure that when we come up with a plan of attack on streets and we prioritize, that we're paying close attention to the utilities under that street so that we're not paving a new street and then the next week I see Gerald out there digging up the new street because there's
Water leak.
utility leaks all underneath it. So it's something that we really have to, cause there's no such thing as patching it back the way it was.
No.
You can patch it back really close, but it's never the same.
So that's typically the first step. Whenever we identify these streets, the next thing we do is identify what utilities might run under the streets, determine whether or not they need to be replaced. If they've been replaced or if they need to be replaced, we'll take care of those utilities under those streets and before that street gets reconstructed. So you're gonna have as an example, we had about a $500,000 a year cost in Freeport. We also budgeted $100,000 a year for utilities to replace any utilities that might need to be replaced. Sometimes we didn't need that money. Sometimes we needed a little bit more, but we always had that money available to replace utilities.
What are we currently budgeting?
We budget $75,000 in the street department.
Again, so that's just maintenance, so no
That is supposed to be for street resurfacing,
rehabilitation.
We spent 50 of that already this year. So, we pretty much shot most of our budget for this fiscal year. So this is kind of a planning project for future years.
Can you talk more about the bond process to help foster this?
Yes, so you can actually issue a certificate of obligation. Say if we decide we're gonna, do $7.5 million worth of street reconstruction. You can issue a bond, you'll pay for that bond over the next 20 years. And, so you have to have capacity to issue debt. Right now, our general fund debt, Roxanne, what does that look like? Do we have some bonds that are gonna be retired here in the next year or two in general fund?
Yep, just give me a second to pull up my spreadsheet.
Well, she's looking at that, is that, as a bond, is that something we vote on, or is that something the public at large votes on?
Well, you can do it either way, depending upon if you do a general obligation bond. That would be voted on by the public. Or you can do a certificate of obligation that would just be voted on by council. Typically, if you're doing something like a park, or a city hall, or a police station, something that is not necessarily, if there's any doubt in your mind whether or not it would be supported by the public, then you want to do a general obligation bond. The general obligation bond takes a lot longer because you have to wait and run that bond with a general election, and it takes probably 3 months in advance prior to that, or 4 months to get everything ready, and then pass the ordinance to get it on the ballot. So it just depends on whether or not that would be the case. Generally, water and sewer projects that you need to do are funded through a certificate of obligation. Street improvements are normally done as a certificate of obligation. But things that are kind of, oh, we don't need that, like a new city hall or police department or park, that could be politically divisive. You want to let the.
Is there such a thing as, if you're gonna go out for a general election bond, if you're gonna go out for the street bond, and is there such a thing as issuing it a invitation to bid contingent on the bond passing? And the reason I'm saying that is I hate when we get ourselves in this position. We go out and ask for a general election bond for so much money, and we say we're gonna do this, this, and this with it. And then when it comes time to do it, that money only got us this. And that's misleading, not intentionally, but it's misleading to the voters. So could we go out and say, we're putting this out for bid, and it came back at $6 million, and that contractor is obligated to do that work starting in 3 months from now if this passes. That way, we're going to the public and saying, this is exactly what you're getting. It's already been bid. It's already been let. It just, the postponement is hinging on whether or not this passes.
Typically, you can't do that only because of the fact when you go out for bid for a project, that bid is only good for 60 days. And the bond process would take longer than that, or the election process would take longer than that. I mean, what you can do is,
Isn't it as good as long as we put an instruction to bidders of what the expectation is? That's the way.
it would probably drive up the bid cost. If I bid on something and I'm bidding on something that I'm gonna do next year, or 6 months or 9 months from now, where there's uncertainty about what costs are gonna be, I'm gonna bid high and not necessarily have that. I mean, what you would probably be better to do is to under-promise with your bond. In other words, if we go out and we get estimates on what the project's gonna cost, say, the engineer's estimate is $8 million to do these set of streets, in this priority order, you can go out for your bond election and say, we're gonna do, instead of A, B, C, D, E, and F and G streets, we're gonna do A, B, C, D, E, and if funds are available, F and G and H, you know what I'm saying? So when you do the election, it can only be used for streets, reconstruction, and, depending upon how specific you are in the language for the bond, that would dictate how much that you can do. But you're not gonna be able to, and that happens, because I know, like.
It just happened on water line replacement.
City of Lake Jackson went out for a bond election to do an animal shelter that was supported, and so they were able to do it, but the animal shelter the bids came in really, really high, so they had to rescale the animal shelter. In this case, we're doing it for streets. We may not specify which streets we're gonna do. We're gonna do however many we can afford to do with that bond issue, and that's all you can spend it on. You can't spend it on anything else, like a city hall or anything else other than street reconstruction. Unless you specify, we're gonna go out for this general obligation bond to do different projects. You can do it that way. You can say, we're gonna do street reconstruction with, 35, up to this amount. We'll do whatever other project up to this amount. You can identify different projects in that bond election with specific amounts, but then that's what you're limited to by amount. But you can't, I've never seen getting a bid and then going out for election for that bid, based on that bid, just because the bids typically aren't gonna be that long, and I think that it would cause the project to get a lot more expensive if you're bidding something.
Let's be a pioneer and try it.
I'm sorry?
Be a pioneer and try it. I mean, because it's real. I mean, we go out and we say, we need this much money, and we're gonna do this, this, and this. Well, you might as well take E, F, and G and throw them out the window, because they're not happening. That's the reality of what happens. The engineer thought it was gonna come in at $200 a foot, it came in at $300 a foot, so now we're giving them 2/3 of what we thought we were gonna give them, and that's not fair to them. Because the person that's voting on E, F, and G should be able to vote confidently that I'm gonna get what I'm voting for, which is E, F, and G. If my street is E, F, and G, and I have no likelihood that that's gonna happen, I need to know that. That's fair to know that. So I bid a job today that doesn't start until the middle of 26. I mean, that's the business we're in. That's the business these guys are in.
I'm just saying, I've never heard of bidding a project out that far in advance.
Oh,
I think Councilmember Perry's concerns have a tremendous amount of merit.
I'll check and see if that's.
I'd like to
that's feasible.
get our creative thinking out and see if it's possible. If, we still got a long way to go before we get to that point, but if I'm still around,
Well, and if I could interject, and not just this project, but anything we go to a bond project with, I mean, we, as you well stated, clearly stated, we owe that to our citizens, right?
Yep. I mean, I had a project, a wastewater treatment plant project, that we had and this is not a bond issue, but we submitted for a $6 million grant for a wastewater treatment plant, improvement project. We got the grant. It took like 2.5 years for the engineer to get it out for bid. And when they did, the project was like $11 million. We only had $6 million available.
yeah.
So we had some hard decisions to make, and but there's at the same time we have other projects like like the streetscape that we just got that grant for, that came in under bid, and I think our wastewater treatment plant. How long was that? When did we get that grant award for the wastewater treatment plant? What's that?
2020?
And we just went out for bids and it came in within the budget that we had for it. So it really depends on how conservative you are when you're making your estimates.
Right.
What's that?
It's not quite right. The project that was put in 2018 was for a brand new, section of the plant at $10.5 million. We cut the project down to a $3.3 million project in 2020, and that project since then has escalated to almost $3.5 million.
Okay, I'll shut up because that actually illustrates your point.
And Morris, if I didn't ask this question, may sound like a dumb question, but I'm gonna ask it. There's typically not any grants available for this type of work.
There are some limited grants available, not to the level that we need. I just had submitted that $500,000 grant request that would have addressed, was it Scarborough? I forget which street that we were looking at.
San Gabriel.
San Gabriel. We were unsuccessful in getting that grant. But
And the reason we were, because we'd recently received a grant.
Yeah, so
Yes.
that hurt us on our score. So we'll resubmit next year for $500,000 to try to get that grant again. But that will probably, if that's the case, if that rule proves true, we'll probably be successful about every other year, potentially in getting that grant.
Plug it away.
And if we align that stuff correctly, bid openings, and along with that, 3 months to start a project isn't, 3 or 4 months is not far out down the road. That's, it happens like that.
Realistically, it's not.
Right. It's really not. So I think it's something we could explore anyway.
I will definitely look into it. But on the face of this, if we have questions about this list specifically, Ben, do you have that thing to be able to look and say, hey, this is what this would cost?
Yes.
So we've got three different, the way that spreadsheet works, or the Excel formula works, there are different types of processes that we would put in there, based on.
I will email you the Excel and it will have this price calculation on here. So if you find a street that is high priority and you want to see what the rough cost would be, you can plug in the numbers. There's some formulas on here.
If we're doing a mill of the road with a 2-inch overlay, what that cost is per square foot. If we have to redo the base and the 2-inch overlay, there's a cost for that. Or if it's a concrete, if we're taking out concrete and replacing that with concrete, there's a cost for that. Is that right, 32?
Yeah, so the concrete's on a square foot basis and then the others are on square yard.
Okay.
And so
Not that bad.
we can run it through. So Shannon, if you'll type in, we'll just say you have 7,500 square foot. If you'll just type in 7,500 where you got it. Or not there actually. Yeah, undo that. Click the undo button. Yeah,
Up here in the
okay.
top right-hand corner.
To the left. So don't type, you won't want to type it in there because there's a formula in there. So you'll type it to the left cell, right between the two items. Yes. If you type in a number, make sure to type it in that cell. So she'll type in 7,500 and tab. It converts it to square yards for you. So it'll give you that number. So say if you want to do a mill with a 2-inch overlay, if you'll go in between those two cells on the mill, that one, and if you'll type in the number that you just got for the square yard, and then if you tab, it'll give you a rough price on how much that's going to cost. So it'll help you in your decision making. And I'll send this to all of you at the end of the meeting. So you'll have the ability to search the spreadsheet. You can sort it however you want because it's in drop-down menus. So there'll be a drop-down menu at the top that you can click on and you can sort it by. If you only want to see the good streets, you can only see the good streets. However you'd like to see it.
So lock all your cells?
You can, yeah.
No, I suggest you lock them.
Why
Well-
don't you lock them?
Yeah,
Lock the formula.
I will lock it.
For my sake.
Yes, I will lock it.
And the other thing is, these three options are, I am not gonna recommend to council that we use the county for chip and seal any longer. But there was the other option that we were looking at with, similar to what they did on 487. That still might be an option. I don't remember, do you remember what that cost was per square foot? $18 a square foot? I think that may have been it, but we may add that in as an option too for council to consider. And what Gerald and I had talked about doing is actually coming up with another short section or another street. How long do we have to do for him to give us the?
How long did we do for,
In order for him to give us the best price that he had, it was a certain length,
I think it was 7,500 feet?
7,500 feet. And so we might try to come up with that amount of of distance this year, this summer, and do one of those streets for y'all to see what it looks like, and see if that's something we might want to consider. So that's not, typically that type of street has about a 10-year lifespan, but again, it is about half the cost of asphalt.
Ask for some clarification here. If I'm understanding you correctly, we have all these in red, all that are failing. However, in the budget for this year, we had 75,000 budgeted, but we already spent 50,000, so we only have $25,000, but we have all this to do. So really, we're not gonna be able to touch any of this unless we get a bond or do the bond. Did I understand that right?
This fiscal year, yeah. So this exercise is really to begin the budgetary process for next fiscal year, 25, 26.
Okay, that's why I was like, we're not gonna get any of this done with $25,000.
Yeah, no, this is not,
This is,
Trucks out there for that.
my hope originally was that we'd have some, but that was when I first talked to you about having this list together.
right,
It was before we had made the decision to go forward. But even with that, we only budgeted $75,000. We knew that we were gonna have to come up with an additional. And another thought that I had is to get with the county to try to strong arm them to giving us some of their tax, they collect a half-cent tax So in most cities that I've worked in, the cities collect 1 cent of tax, 1 cent of sales tax that directly supports the general fund, and then they can do an election for another cent of sales tax for a specific purpose. In Rockdale, we have a ½ cent going to the MDD. You know, in some cities, that other ½ cent might be going to a public safety district. In other words, we fund police and fire. Or that ½ cent, in this case, what I was going to suggest could go to street reconstruction in the city of Rockdale. I found out that that's not possible to get that ½ cent for election on our ballot, take it back from the county, unless the county does away with it countywide, and then we have an election to put it on the ballot. I have no doubt that that would pass to keep it here, but I don't think we would have a very good chance of having it getting dissolved countywide. But at the same time, I'm going to be talking to Cameron and Thorndale about going to the county commissioners and saying, you guys are receiving a ½ cent countywide, which amounts to $2.5 million. That is by the ordinance by the election that they had, is supposed to be used specifically for economic development. I don't think that it is. So I'm going to ask them to be able to kick back part of that money to the cities, because that money is going to continue to go up, especially with SLR and everything else that's going on. It's going to, that revenue that they're receiving, that they're supposed to be using for economic development, and it's not being used for that purpose, I think could come back, part of it can come back that way. I'm going to talk to Greg Whitmire about trying to get some of that money on an annual basis for street reconstruction.
I support you in that endeavor, and we'll help you however you see fit. Well, we won't know until we try.
If I could meander just briefly, when we talk about streets, I'm assuming that sidewalks are a whole different story. And I look at the streets where our schools are, and by and large, we have better paved streets going to the junior high, the senior high, and the intermediate school, and we have decent sidewalks going to those. The elementary school, our most vulnerable young people, are in an area where we don't have sidewalks under a big chunk of that. And so therefore, if they're walking in streets, and there's just some, you know, Bowser to me is a little more problematic than it was graded here, because I drive it daily and I see, you know, the potholes that just recur because of leaks. But it seems like I would just say we need to always be prioritizing the schools and the sidewalks around our schools.
Dave, I agree with you. I have a question though. Do kids walk, are kids even allowed to walk to school anymore at the elementary level? They do? There's kids walking?
Plenty of them, especially on the east side. It seems like there's a lot of kids, and with the shortage of buses, I mean, somebody could probably speak more clearly about that.
And I remember that when my kids were in elementary school, they told me, your kids can't ride your bike to school, and I told them, well, my kids will get to school however I decide they're gonna get to school. But
Yeah, there's a lot of kids that walk to and from school at all ages.
Elementary age.
I knew it at the junior, I see it at the junior high.
You live right there, so you see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's just an ongoing thing as far as police presence. We see people blow through the stop sign at College Street and Belton daily. And even when school's not in session, the parking lots and the streets around there are bicycle and walking, and there's just a lot of stuff, and I hate to see a tragedy.
I think also that does have to, it's really has to do with the school, because they have a bus shortage, so they've had to limit how many kids can ride the bus. So maybe before we had more bus drivers and more kids were getting on the bus instead of walking, but these days a lot of kids walk.
Your point, though, is I remember having this conversation with John King, and when we tried to get, there was a time where we were going to get some grants that were going to do a lot of sidewalk work, and part of that would have been to come up Bell, where what sidewalk there is not in good shape, and they're right behind the school. But because at that point in time so much of our students were bused, they didn't consider us for a particular grant. you don't have anybody walking to school anyway, was the response then.
Well, that could differ now, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, from a budgetary standpoint, some cities budget sidewalk in with their street maintenance budget. You know, curbs, sidewalks are also, can be replaced at the same time, under the same contract, or if the city crews do that. Some cities crews will do the sidewalks and have a contractor do the streets. But more frequently, that'll be a separate budget. Sidewalks are separately budgeted from the street budgeted, which,
If you're over in the high school area, some of you on the west side see this more than I do, on Murray Street, once you get over across the street to the Church of Christ heading west, I'm driving down that street frequently where kids are walking on the street because they don't have a sidewalk.
I would say, please, take pictures when you see that happening. Take pictures and save them or send them, because of the fact I know that when we submit grants for that, those types of pictures are really help those applications significantly. When kids are walking in the street because of the conditions that they have, those will help secure that grant application. There are grants that we can apply for, you know, and there's some huge grants. And because of our low mod population, it won't require any match. But they're really, really competitive. They're very, very competitive.
Any other discussions on this agenda item 3 topic? Any other discussions on?
Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
Ben, great job.
Appreciate it.
Still need the budget numbers, or the debt numbers for general fund.
Sure.
Right now, we are, on the general fund side, we have 4.2 million that we still have to pay off.
And our annual payment is how much?
Our annual payment for this year is going to be, it's 539,000 this year.
Okay, and when does that, there's a point where one of those gets retired and that drops down, correct?
Say again?
There's a point where that one of those bonds gets paid off and retired, and that number, annual payment drops down?
2006, the general fund bond will be paid off in 2026. Basically, all that debt will be paid off by 2033.
And the 2026 debt that gets paid off, what does that drop our monthly, our annual payment to? From 500 to,
Your question is, of that
It
500,
stays
what
at
drops?
500, even after that one drops.
oh, because the other bond is structured to replace it.
Yeah.
I was hoping that after that was paid off, it would drop down to be able to allow us
2033 is our golden year.
to issue additional debt without raising our INS debt rate. But, it looks like the way it was structured, it won't do that. But 2032 is when it gets paid off, which is 8 years. So we could start looking at a bond potentially to wrap around that, but it might be problematic. Or there might be some refinancing that can be done. We'll look at options.
After one drops off, can you refinance the second one and pick up that delta onto another?
Well, that's normally what happens, that's normally what I try to do. If I have three bond issues and they all get paid off, like, you know, there's a lag between each one. When one drops on, I can add another one. But the way this current is structured, the second bond that doesn't retire until 2032, its payments go up as it wraps around that one, so its payment goes up and takes up that.
When was that bond issued, the one that drops in 32? How old is it?
Be probably
We
20 years.
have,
2012?
2011, 2011 and 2015 both get paid off in 2031. 2016, which was the new police department, it gets paid off in 32. And then the 2017 COs will be paid off in 2033.
2033, all the bonds will be paid, correct?
We'll be debt-free at that point unless we issue more debt between them.
We'll be out of debt by 2033.
It's probable. But the other thing also is, you know, as growth happens and our assessed value goes up, then, you know, we'll have more room for debt as well. And with a level INS.
Any other discussion?
Is there a penalty for early payoff of that type of bond? So as our revenue increases, instead of being able to absorb more debt, we can also pay more principal.
Right, or we could issue more debt. Which if we're trying to, if we're trying to get this type of stuff done, we'll need the cash rather than the debt capacity. But you could pay it off if there's some way we were able to figure to get it paid off early, then you could start over with new debt. But
I have one last question. To circle back, when would we start on this bond to do this?
I would like, what
This
I would like to
fall?
do is to get each of you, and Ben's gonna send out the some additional information. In the information he sent out, there's also pictures to go with each section. And how many sections did we count? 100
I'd say 478.
478 different blocks in this list. There's 478 pictures that are in that drop box, so you can look at each one, you can drive around. What I'd like to do is within the next 2 weeks, have you send Ben your priority 5 streets from this list. Five priority streets from failed streets, and 3 priority streets from the poor streets. And then we'll compile that with some staff recommendations as well, and then come back and look at that probably at a meeting in February.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or discussion? Any other questions or discussion? Being none, we're going to convene into executive session. 6:27 PM, we'll convene into executive session under section 551072 of the Texas Government Code to deliberate about purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property for the purpose of commercial development inside the district boundaries. We're now convening into executive session.